Welcome into the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and it is time to look back at the 2023 running backs. We're going to look at them compared to as a whole. Previous seasons, I have been keeping data on them for several years now, most notably for this purpose in relation to the chart that you are seeing on the screen up ahead of me. This is my equalized value chart. And I'm not going to describe, I'll give you a brief description of it in this video, but if you want to know more about it, more specifics, I did go into more detail in the Tight Ends Awards show video. And there will be a little thing at the top of the screen here, a little card to that video if you would like to watch that to get more information about it. The short version is that it takes consistency into account more so than the average fantasy points per week, but it is similar to the average fantasy points per week, and it is done on a scale of 0 to 36 points that are awarded at certain times. And so here is that the end result of that 0 to 36 point scale. Here is the average fantasy points per week scored and how many on average, if that was the highest average fantasy points per week, etc. And here's the EV ranking, which is the order that I have the running backs in right now. I will go over the end results of how well these running backs performed for you, whether the first best running back on the season or the 44th. So I said 44th because that's how many running backs that I have on this chart at the end of the day here. Now, if you do want to look closer at this information, want to download it, change, alter it, whatever, to look at things a little bit differently, you can do that if you are a member of the channel. 99 cents, you get access to something like this, the EV data chart, and I will give you'll get access to also the next season as the weeks go on. I fill this out throughout the entirety of the season, so you can get for any kind of trades or anything like that, you can kind of see who's performing well consistently as the season goes along as well. So that's helpful. Also, a lot of NFL draft stuff that I will have available only to people who decide to be members of the channel. It's not that I want to put stuff behind a paywall. That's why I have like 99 cents gets you the membership. It's just that I want to reward those who do want to help to support the channel. So that pitch is just to let you know about that. Let's get into, hopefully I didn't miss anything too serious, how the running backs did this season as a whole. And much like I said in the tight ends video and in the quarterbacks video, production was down across the board, the entirety of the board for the running back position, from the running back 1 through the running back 72. And what that means is part of this EV equalized value chart is that I keep track of how many fantasy points were scored at the running back 1 position, at the running back 6 position, 12, intervals of 6, all the way on down to the running back 72. And from the running back 1 through the running back 48 at each of those pit stops, production was down by about a half of a point, all the way up to a full point compared to 2021 and 2022 season. And even after that point, production was still down, just to lesser extent, all the way down to the running back 72. Once again, 44 running backs on the screen right now. Well, not on the screen right now, on this chart. No sense in keeping track of every single running back who had a single carry on the season, but also eliminated any running backs who had less than, I believe it was 5 games played from this sample, just so that way, one game doesn't skew anything too much. And that's, by the way, one game skewing anything too much. That's the whole point of the EV system as well. So a game like this for Christian McCaffrey, 45.2 points, well, you throw that on top of the rest of Bijan Robinson's season, and he probably looks like he had a lot better of a season via the average fantasy points per week, despite the fact that still had a lot of weeks where he might not have helped you win. So back to, and obviously he still was a good running back too, by the way, Bijan. But anyways, here is the order that I have ended on the 2023 season. Christian McCaffrey was the best running back for you, same with Kyren Williamson. Average fantasy points scored on a weekly basis would also dictate that those two were the best guys whenever available. Of course, Kyren Williams did miss a stretch of time. That's not really calculated into this. Then Devon A. Chan, David Montgomery, Raheem Mostert, Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, Rashad White, Jahmyr Gibbs, Travis Etienne Jr., James Conner, Isaiah Pacheco, all RB1s on the season. There's your top 12 this year. Follow that up with Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, and then Bijan Robinson at running back 15, by the way. Somebody pretty much called me an idiot in the offseason for not having him ranked in my top 4 running backs. You can suck it. And I don't say that because I think I welcome critique. I welcome you to disagree with things. I would much prefer it if you gave some sort of argument with it. But I also, if you're going to be a jerk about it, then I'm going to tell you to suck it. But, there are times that you could tell me to suck it too, I'm sure. Kenneth Walker, followed by Jerome Ford here, Josh Jacobs in at running back 18 on the year, Brian Robinson Jr., Breece Hall, DeAndre Swift, Derrick Henry, James Cook, Tony Pollard, Austin Eckler, all the way down there. What a disappointment. Keaton Mitchell, Aaron Jones, Gus Edwards, Zach Moss, Jalen Warren, Ramondre Stevenson, all the way down at running back 31 on the year via EV. And major disappointment for my rankings because I had him quite high, and he did not live up to those. So my apologies on that one. There, you could tell me to suck it. Chuba Hubbard, Najee Harris, Ezekiel Elliott, Javonte Williams. Let's see, Ezekiel Elliott finishing up. Nope. Alexander Madison finishes up your top 36. So now we're getting into kind of outside of flex territory-ish. But all these guys would have been flex options here. Same tier as Alexander Madison, Deonta Foreman, Devin Singletary, A.J. Dillon, Kareem Hunt, Khalil Herbert, Tyler Algier. Then we move into a different tier, as you can kind of see the coloring over here. Tyjae Spears, Antonio Gibson, the last 2 running backs to make it into these rankings. So there you go. Those are the results of the 2023 season. Now let's just look at a couple of some proof of concept ideas in favor, hopefully, of the EV, but just continuously to test to make sure that this EV is truly telling us the running backs who gave us the best chance to win on any given week kind of basis, rather than the running back who at least once gave us this massive week, which might have really, really helped, but also might have hurt our team more often than not. So that is what we are looking at, and here you can see this big difference. 8 spots higher on the EV was David Montgomery. Average fantasy points per week would have had him ranked 12th, and we can compare him to average fantasy points per week ranked 3rd and 5th running backs, Raheem Mostert, Alvin Kamara, in that order, who are right behind him here via EV. So EV thinks they're very equal. Whereas you look at, a top 5 player compared to a top 12 player, you would think that top 5 player was much more helpful for you, would have helped you win more games on a weekly basis, right? Well, maybe not so much. So, David Montgomery, first of all, just in terms of his consistency here, why he got up here, on an average basis, throughout the entirety of the season, all these games that he played, there were only 2 weeks where he gave you 0 weeks. He gave you worse than a top 24 running back type of performance. These 2 weeks here were his worst 2 weeks, and they were top 24 running back type of performances, meaning they were within a certain range of what the average 24th running back scores. So every single week, he was roughly a starting running back that he played. That is absolutely, obviously, dynamite to have, very consistent. And when we compare him to some guys who perform better on the average fantasy points per weekly basis, Raheem Mostert specifically here, out of 10 games, David Montgomery still did better than Raheem Mostert 6 of those weeks. So he had a 6-4 head-to-head record against Raheem Mostert. So proof of concept works in favor of David Montgomery against Raheem Mostert, and then Alvin Kamara, another guy who did better than him, average fantasy points per week, lower on the EV scale. He did even better against. Out of 9 games where they both played, he won 6 of those weeks. A little bit about David Montgomery, how to view him going into 2024, and just analyzing his production and how he got this consistent production in 2023. Well, much like Raheem Mostert, another guy who's going to be in the same boat, they were both highly touchdown reliant. The good thing in terms of looking forward for David Montgomery is that this is the second year in a row where a Lions running back had a lot of touchdowns. It's part of the system. We can think that is something that maybe we can kind of rely on with Dan Campbell going forward in this offense. But there is more to the story, and that is, of course, the first-round pick, Jahmyr Gibbs, who came in and got utilized more as the year went along. And when you look at the production here for David Montgomery, weeks 13 through 17, you will see that this ceiling that he had, especially this, to start the year, kind of starts to wane off a little bit, even earlier than that. But just looking at these weeks 13 through 17, see a little bit more of a floor, a little bit less of a ceiling, and you would see that that's when Jahmyr Gibbs kind of starts to turn it on a little bit more here in the back of the season, and got more usage, and even the team felt more comfortable using him around the goal line as the season went along. But when you go back to week 10, you would actually see too here that him and Jahmyr Gibbs both were able to produce in the same weeks and have both of them top 12 type of weeks. 2 of these weeks, one of them top 12, one top 18 in the other week. All successful double-digit 12-plus fantasy point weeks for Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, 3 weeks in a row for the both of them. I don't think we can quite expect that next season. I'm looking at this, though, and I'm seeing what, at the worst-case scenario, I think we can expect, which is kind of a boring but also consistent and reliable RB2. That's how I view him, with a little bit of this upside here. So I don't want to be the low guy on David Montgomery next season is basically how it boils down to. And I think it'll be easy for people to kind of say, oh, it's all going to be Jahmyr Gibbs. But just, you look at this, even these final 5 games, that's not bad. It's not bad production to have, especially if you're going to be able to get him as like a flex type of guy for you. Then we go a little bit lower here, and the next thing, we don't really have to go that far, that's going to stand out is this grouping right here from running backs Joe Mixon, Rachaad White, Jahmyr Gibbs, to these two, Travis Etienne Jr. and James Conner. So Etienne, James Conner, both finished as top 10 running backs via average fantasy points per week, 10 and 11 via EV. And that ends up putting him behind these guys who ended up performing better. Joe Mixon, Rachaad White, Jahmyr Gibbs, due to consistency, due to the EV, equalized value system, 7th, 8th, 9th, whereas they were 12th, 14th, and 11th via average fantasy points per week. So, once again, going to do same thing here, head-to-head, comparing them, and do it a little bit more broadly here. When we compared Etienne versus Mixon, Rachaad White and Gibbs, remember Etienne should be performing better on a week-to-week basis than these guys. He had a losing record, went 20-24 against them. And then just behind that, James Conner against those guys, a little smaller sample size. James Conner, I think, missed more games, or however it ended up working out. But Conner versus Mixon, White, and Gibbs ends up with a head-to-head record of 16-17, so still on the losing side. Essentially a coin flip against guys that he should be somewhat significantly better than, or at least on the other side of that coin flip you would expect. So wanted to look at these a little bit closer, and what we actually find out here is that Rachaad White, Jahmyr Gibbs, both ranked behind Mixon, even on the EV scale here, were really the guys that were winning consistently against James Conner and Etienne. White with a record of 15-11 head-to-head against them. Gibbs with a record of 14-11 head-to-head against them. Whereas Mixon, head-to-head against them, went to 12-14, had a losing record. Etienne and Conner combined would have been better options than Mixon. Mixon, does come in here as like Mr. Consistency. He's kind of been this for this is like his 3rd year now, where the EV system absolutely likes him a lot. He's always doing better in the EV system. He's always just more consistent than he is somebody who offers you a bunch of boom or bust to him. This year, a little bit of boom at least. 4 of these games, top 6 games, so not bad. They're a little more reckless this year than others, but still didn't quite hold up to some of those more boom or busty running backs like Jahmyr Gibbs, Travis Etienne on a week in and week out scale. And kind of point that out because we're going to start to see this EV system, my checks and balances for it to see does it still withstand the proof of concept, is going to start to falter a little bit here with Isaiah Pacheco. We're going to compare him because to Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley. I think you can figure out why here. Performed much better in EV and did much worse in average fantasy points per week compared to the other two. Should be worse than them. And when I looked at his head-to-head record against JT and Saquon Barkley, Isaiah Pacheco's that is, he does not hold up against those other two. I don't know why I didn't write down the actual end results here. I didn't. But it doesn't work out for Pacheco, but you can, if you want to look closer at that, you can find some bad luck that gets involved with that for Pacheco. Nonetheless, this is something to keep in mind going into next season for me in regards to Isaiah Pacheco, not so much for Jonathan Taylor, Saquon, but however you want to look at it, whether it be that Pacheco was in the same tier as Saquon and Jonathan Taylor, or that Saquon and Jonathan Taylor are in the same tier as Isaiah Pacheco. I think the one thing that we can pull out of this is that going into next season, Isaiah Pacheco, I think, definitely has earned himself to be a back-end, borderline RB1 type of running back. And he is maybe not ahead of, but in the same conversation as JT and Saquon Barkley based on how they did this year. And I would say going into next season, probably more so in the same conversation as Saquon Barkley than JT, at least for half PPR. Full PPR, might still lean Saquon Barkley there. And we'll see how that New York Giants, what happens with Saquon Barkley. Still a lot to happen going into next season. But as far as this past year goes, Pacheco performed on par with them, did very, very well. So surprising compared to probably what we might have thought coming into the season, compared to names like JT and Saquon Barkley, of course, big names. Then we're going to go a little bit lower, and another big name as of late, Breece Hall, second season. You can see average fantasy points per week, running back 6, and he's all the way down here, EV 20 running back. So big difference, and in fact, I'm going to have him go head-to-head against David Montgomery, and then every running back from Joe Mixon on down to Brian Robinson Jr., who are all ranked ahead of him via the EV system. And what we will see, once again, is that the head-to-head record actually does work in favor of Breece Hall, of the average fantasy points per week, when comparing him to all of those running backs. The head-to-head record ends up being 93 to 91. Bit of a coin flip, but still, Breece Hall definitely tended to be on the winning side against these guys amongst this group. But what I do want to point out is that although you might say that this is a flaw within the system, it's not necessarily, because part of this whole thing is actually, part of the EV is actually how they compare to the entirety of the position. And so what happens when we compare Breece Hall, the running back 6 via average fantasy points per week, compared to the running back 26 on average fantasy points per week, that is Jerome Ford. You would suspect the running back 6 average fantasy points per week should absolutely crush the running back 26, right? Like, I don't know, 70% of the time or something, 7 out of 10 games, he should be the victor, at least. Maybe 75% you would think. I don't know exactly what you would think, but that's a big difference. You would think there's no chance that Jerome Ford is going to score you more points, more weeks where they are both playing in that same week. Fact of the matter is, if you would have had them both on your team, Jerome Ford would have been the guy to start 8 out of 14 weeks. That means he had a head-to-head winning record over Breece Hall, 8-6. Breece Hall losing in that head-to-head record. And so in that sense, EV was correct to have him. And what I really want to point out here is that all of these guys that did better in the EV system compared to Breece Hall would probably do better in general against guys who are ranked lower. So even though Breece Hall did well against them, when you start to go and look at guys who had worse games because of Breece Hall's floor, and it is a bad floor, I'll tell you that in just a second, because of that floor, he would lose more games to worse running backs than these running backs would lose to those same running backs that are worse running backs, once again. But Breece Hall could compete with some of these better running backs, maybe at a slightly better rate than some of these guys. So when you look at this here, Breece Hall ended up as the running back 30 or worse in half of the games, 8 games out of his 16 game sample size. So he was a flex or worse in 16 of those games. A running back 72, this is where you're really hurting your team. A running back 48 or 54 there, right in that range. Running back 60 performance. Some really, really terrible performances that really, frankly, the 6th running back on the season, that's not him. That's not him. He doesn't do that. He doesn't lose to Gus Edwards half of the time. He should be winning 80% of his games against a guy like Gus Edwards. Well, Breece Hall wouldn't have been, because he was very boom or bust. So that's just what I wanted to mention about that. As far as this past season, was he the running back 6, like the average fantasy points per game would lead you to believe? I don't think so. I think that's a little bit too high. But was he as low as the running back 20, like my EV system would have led you to believe? No, I think that was too low on him. I don't think he was that poor either. Somewhere in between a middling or a higher end RB2 is probably where I would put Breece Hall's performance there. He kind of hurt you a fair bit, but he didn't kill you most of the time. Just 3 of those weeks where he really did kill you, though, which is still something to say. A lot of these running backs didn't touch anywhere near that low, even in any given week. So, let's see, a couple of others to look at. Derrick Henry was kind of on the same... there we go. DeAndre Swift, Derrick Henry, very, very similar results via EV this season. You would think Derrick Henry would have done a lot better than him, but not to say, I think they split 50-50 here on the head-to-head, and just looking forward into next season, I think this says more about Derrick Henry than it does about DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift, whatever, but Derrick Henry has been a guy who perennially we've been drafting as an RB1, and if he's going to be DeAndre Swift on a good day, that's not an RB1. We'll see what the situation ends up looking like for Derrick Henry, what team he's on and all that this upcoming year, but especially if we put him into this same situation, frankly, he's a back-end RB2 to me. So the days of Derrick Henry, King Henry, are coming towards an end. I think we'll still get some of those performances next year. I think he can still maintain roughly what he gave us this season if he's in some sort of similar situation at least. So that would be helpful. A better offense could go a long ways, getting some of those touchdowns to outperforming this RB2 spot. So we'll see where he ends up going. I don't think he's done with yet completely. Then another running back to keep our eyes on. Unfortunately, major injury for Keaton Mitchell. Kind of later on in the season here. Let's see. I mean, it must be week 16. It's pretty late in the season, so probably going to impact him early on in the year next year. But a guy who, especially if he's going to be put on IR or something where you could then put him in your IR spot, don't forget about him in the draft, because based on this small sample size, how did he perform this year was, essentially not too far off from Derrick Henry. A back end or a high end flex is where I would put Keaton Mitchell if he were healthy coming into next year, and that's with Gus Bus. Now, if he were to be declared the starting running back, that would change a lot, and we would put him, even higher, be a Devon Achane light kind of Breece Hall kind of performance maybe guy. So just want to point that out because the average fantasy points per week on him is quite low because he did play several weeks where he didn't do much, but when he was actually playing for the team and actually getting significant runs, he did pretty well. And so I expect by the end of next year he'll be once again in that conversation where he's a guy who could help you out, and of course going in 2 years from now. So somebody, Keaton Mitchell, not to ignore for Dynasty if you're looking ahead in Dynasty already. There you go. At the end of the day, for the running back position, is consistency the most important factor for running backs? Is it more important than the boom or bust element of a running back? Well, not so necessarily when facing like peers. So, when Breece Hall was facing these guys that I would say were in his the like peer range here, no, boom or bust ended up helping him out more. But when you're looking at the entirety of the position, yes, consistency still is going to pay out. So that's kind of an argument for which is more important for you. At the end of the day, on draft day, I do lean a little bit more towards taking a chance on the boom or bust element, because once again, that is going to help you out when you're facing like peers. That is going to give you a Raheem Mostert who, for where you got him in the draft, he was a big risk, a big boom or bust pick, and there were a lot of concerns about him coming into the year, but he was, and I said this at the beginning of the draft season last year, and I don't know why I didn't continue to repeat it. A guy that's getting the starting running back spot on an offense like Miami cannot be taken anywhere near as late as Raheem Mostert was getting taken in drafts. That was ridiculous. Let's as a community not make that mistake again. And so there you go. That is it for the running back video. Wide receiver video yet to come to wrap these up. And I am already miles ahead of where I was at last year in terms of the draft class. So NFL draft stuff coming through for you real soon. Stick around for that. Peace out.